supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace?
Broad's Beard Care is the proud sponsor of the program, handcrafted here in Central Florida area in Winter Garden by Kelly Brott himself. Go to brotsbeardcare.com. Use promo code 3beards with a capital B. He has, I want to say, 16 different blends of beard oil, along with beard soap, the lip balm Chris is showing right there. You've got beard combs,
hand soap,
amazing products for the beard. And even for those people that are thinking about starting it, you won't be disappointed. And we have the pleasure of reintroducing our previous guest, Dr. Mark Mirabello. I'm a professional here, aren't we?
You are.
Yes. He is professor of history at Shawnee State University. His background, I mean, we're just talking history here, people. I mean, BA of history at the University of Toledo, master's at the University of Virginia in history, and then if that wasn't enough, he decided to fly across the pond and get his PhD in the University of Glasgow. So, I mean, if there's somebody that knows his history, it's going to be this man. So, Dr. Mark Mirabello, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you again for welcoming or letting me come back. By the way, as we mentioned before the broadcast began, it's rather curious. It's literally we'll be talking about some afterlife concepts. It's the 13th anniversary of my father's death to the day.
Oh, wow.
He passed away this day 13 years ago. And it reminds me, because again, there's a lot of confusion. I was going to talk tonight about ghosts and talking to the dead. There's a great deal of confusion, mainly because of films and popular culture, of what it's like when you make the contact. And for most people, there's actually two types. There's something called a wraith or a crisis apparition. Typically, if someone's going to communicate a message, let's say, for example, the location of a will or who murdered them or this sort of information, you would have a crisis apposition within 24 hours of the person's death, where the dying person is sending a message. And rather oddly, I live presently 250 miles from where my father was living. I realized when he died. I woke up that morning and didn't see him physically, but felt a kind of presence that something had happened. And oddly enough, my mother, who died in the 1980s of cancer, my dad had alerted me that she was dying. I was on an overnight train from Glasgow to London to catch a flight, and I had the same experience. I was in a sleeper car that she had passed away. Communication. So
wow.
For your guests, if a loved one is going to contact you, it's normally within 24 hours, and that's a wraith. What most people think of a ghost, they think of so-called hauntings, and they're completely different. Typically, the haunting is the same. For example, the apparition will do the same thing over and over again. You'll see a woman dressed in white walking down a stairwell. You'll see a person who's been decapitated, holding their head, walking down a hallway. You'll see a Roman soldier, if you're visiting the Colosseum, walking by the Colosseum. And what confuses people, in the 19th century, when they seriously researched this, they dismissed ghosts in the 19th century when they researched it, because they noticed they didn't show intelligent activities. They just repeated the same thing over and over. And this led to skepticism that it was a real thing. But in fact, what they were doing were confusing. Again, the wraith is very different from the ghost. In fact, I should mention several cultures. The Choctaw Indians claim we have two shadows, an inner shadow and an outer shadow you see on the ground. And when we die, the inner shadow goes to the other world. The outer shadow stays here. That's why it shows not really intelligent direction. It's just a shadow that remains behind. Or Paracelsus in the 16th century, he said there's three aspects. There's your soul that goes elsewhere. There's also your body, which decomposes here. But then he described an astral soul. That's what the ghost is. In other words, it's not your mind. It's something that you leave behind, an aspect of yourself.
Now,
So
yeah,
when people,
I was like, just I want before you go to her, I would just want. So is that where like some of the descriptions are when you have an apparition and you interact with them? It seems to be a limited, scope. Like you can't ask them like all these questions because it's more of just, partial glimpses of stuff where it would make sense if it's a shadow, what was left behind. They wouldn't have the intelligent conversation side where just, hey, where are you right now? Oh yeah, I've just been hanging out, up here in heaven doing this stuff. But it's more of the, like an affection thing where somebody would go, I feel love when I'm in the spirit. Well, this person loved you, so that would be something you would engage from that interaction.
Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, I should mention that there are some ghosts that are around for days, months, years that do show intelligent activity. Now, what we're dealing with there, again, it's not just one thing. What we're dealing with there, in fact, go to ancient Babylon. They said we leave behind two things when we die, bones and a ghost. We don't become a ghost. We have one, in a sense. And and the Babylonians believe, in fact, the ancient Greeks did as well, if the dead person received proper burial, and burial was really important, proper disposal of the corpse, the body, they would be in the other world at rest. But if the body were left unburied or left in the wilderness, that person would become a miserable ghost and would torment the living. So that's why, for example, if people claim to see, they're out in the forest or an old house, and they think they see some kind of activity going on, it could be a murder victim who's actually buried. He's not properly buried. His corpse is hidden under the cellar floor. In the 19th century, in fact, this story still appears in all kinds of skeptical books. The Fox sisters, they were two young girls, upstate New York. They claimed they were making communication with an intelligent entity who had been a murder victim some years before, a traveling salesman. And they worked out a code. He was knocking. And they worked out a code to communicate with him. And this would start what becomes known as the spiritualist movement. There are Christian churches in London, in England, and the United States, Christian churches where people try to communicate with loved ones. They're called spiritualist churches. And this is what started with the Fox sisters. Now, what you'll see in standard science books, they'll mention that in the late 1890s, I think it was, one of the Fox sisters, now an old woman, homeless, got on stage and announced it was all a fraud. They'd all faked it. And that's what the skeptics point to. What they leave out was she was a homeless woman and they paid her to say that. Wow. And later she said that, in fact, she just said it for the money. Here's what's curious. Some years later, in the 20th century, another man bought that house where the Fox sisters were living as little girls, was doing renovation work, and in the cellar, he found another wall had been inserted, and he found a skeleton. There really was a murder in that house. And the skeleton showed signs of trauma. In fact, if you have a haunting, almost always there's going to be a body around. Under the cellar, in the wall, in the backyard, there'll be a body somewhere. And so some of these entities can be, again, the restless dead. Also, you have the concept in Judaism that in the Talmud, these are rabbinical commentaries on the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, that some people, they don't realize they're dead. They pass away, they don't realize it, and they continue to live in the house. Now, typically, if you do have a haunted house, it appears as if the entity doesn't realize you're there, and he will continue to live in the house as if it's his house.
Wow.
Interesting.
And by the way, the notion you should be afraid of ghosts is actually that's more child fear, because normally you should feel pity for them. They're miserable entities who are perhaps lonely, hungry, confused. If they're, again, intelligent ghosts. And by the way, it reminds me, you mentioned before we started the broadcast, we were chatting Dante and his Inferno and so forth. Dante's magnificent poem, of course, modern Italian, is based on his dialect because it was so influential, the Tuscan dialect. After he died, one of the cantos was missing, parts of the poem.
Oh, right. I didn't know about that.
And his own son claimed that his father, right after his death, appeared to the son of Dante and told him where the canto was. And oddly enough, it was hidden in a wall in a house the family no longer lived in. And the young man went there, found the canto, and they completed the poetic work. It's clearly not a forgery, because Dante was so talented, it'd be difficult to copy his style. So it's clearly real. Now, notice again, most people never heard this story. Like you said, never heard of it. We tend to airbrush out all these unusual stories. We don't want to believe that they're true. As again, our scientific world, only matter and energy exist. No one has ever seen an electron. We see the effects, but we say they're real. Yet, millions of people have seen ghosts. In fact, we estimate there's about 50,000 ghosts in England alone. It's by far the most haunted area of the world. Part of that could be generated by, because I lived in the case, not England, but Scotland. It's far to the north. You see a lot of shadows. It's often foggy. So some of these may be generated by the environment. You think you see things there, but I think something's going on. And if you do encounter something, don't be afraid. As I mentioned in our previous conversation, English say that if you encounter a ghost, there could be treasure buried at the site. So wait for daylight and start digging. They think that often people obsessed with wealth do not move on, and their souls stay around the treasure.
Wow, that's awesome.
So again, if you see one in your house, get that spade out, the shovel. Start digging a hole. There could be something buried there.
Well, before I get too far in here, we didn't mention it yet. Everybody go to Amazon. He has a book out, A Traveler's Guide to the Afterlife: The Traditions and Beliefs on Death, Dying, and What Lies Beyond. It's available right now, and according to Amazon right now, you have 4 left in stock available. So go get that now before it is sold out.
Buy it for me, Craig.
And he has to resupply it. So that's a good problem to have.
Well, I should mention, I think that's an Amazon ploy. They always act like they're running out.
Yeah.
Because I'm always watching those numbers. Then it'll suddenly pop up to 11 and then go down to 3 or 4. So, but thank you for the plug. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. You're welcome.
By the way, another idea, speaking of plugs, pops in my mind. This was and I wish I'd kept the details, like written down the young lady's name and gotten a copy of the picture. When I first started teaching years ago, the class, hard to believe, we got off on apparitions and ghosts and so forth. And this young girl, at the time 19, this is 20 some years ago, came up after class, and she started to tell me that she had a really close friend who was really horrifically killed in a car accident at the age of 16. Now, incidentally, almost all hauntings, people die violent deaths, accidents, murders, suicides. There's a connection. She told me that this 16-year-old girl who was a really close friend died horrifically in a really horrible car crash. And then, I'm in Southern Ohio. They tend to marry young sometimes around here. This young woman was 19. And the previous summer, she had gone through her wedding ceremony. And then afterward, they were looking at the wedding pictures of the reception and the ceremony. And she explained to me that her best friend was in the pictures. Nobody remembered seeing anything like this. And if she's brought the pictures into me, her wedding pictures, and you would see very clearly, not some mist, a three-dimensional solid person in the pictures. Now, she was always around people, but no one was ever talking to her in any of the pictures. And no one recalled seeing her there. And it was her, she showed me the girl's picture at 16 and showed me the picture in the wedding. And it was exactly the same. It could be a coincidence, but it was stunning.
Wow.
Which reminds me, people don't realize that most ghosts, if you see them, first of all, winter is the time of hauntings. They like, for some reason, the cold. And also, they can appear in daylight, but daylight and light in general seems to weaken them. So you're most likely to see them in the dark, or at twilight or in darkness. And if you do see one, well, if you were to see a ghost, it would look like this. They're solid and three-dimensional. The notion you could see through them, or that they're, again, sort of a translucent, that's more myth than legend. It appears as if you do see a ghost that you can see through, it's one that's fading away. It's really old. There's an old belief that if a person haunts, they only haunt as long as their natural lifetime would be. So if they were murdered at 22 and they were supposed to die at 90, they would haunt or walk for those years that never finished.
Huh.
Wow, that's crazy.
Now, Plato thought that if you see a ghost, it's because he said good people are transparent. You don't see them. But evil people are, again, solid, opaque. But there was some years ago in the 1930s, there was this woman claiming psychic powers from Iceland. And she said when she visited at night a large city like New York City, everywhere she went, she would see dead people. And no one realizes they're dead because they're walking along the street and they appear solid. So you actually may be constantly encountering the dead and not realizing it. Now, there are old legends that they never blink or cast a shadow. But that's not a universal legend. But you could very well, if you're especially in a crowded area at night, people that you're walking by may actually be dead.
Oh, shit.
And
Wow.
they're not these, again, these creatures that you see in Hollywood. And certainly they have some of those ghost haunting shows where someone's looking for a little light on a camera lens. That's not really a significant apparition. You'll see a solid entity. And by the way, where does the legend that they walk through walls? Well, oddly enough, the ghost will follow the so-called domestic geography that existed when he was alive. So, for example, if you renovate a house and put a new wall in, if that wall wasn't there, he'll walk through it. Or if you raise the floor, he'll be walking on the floor that existed when he was alive. So you may see him from the knees up.
No shit.
Oh wow!
That's like I don't know if Craig remembers when I went on vacation to Tennessee. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that I see stuff. I don't see stuff, but I just feel so at peace at night in the mountains. It's like something is there other than you. Like I was like, Craig, it seems like I go out on the patio and I was looking up in the cabin in the mountains, and it's like something is here. It's like you could feel something, but you can't see nothing. I mean,
and by the way, if you do encounter an entity, it doesn't necessarily have to be visual. For example, the most common contact is through all senses. A common one is smelling. You'll smell the entity, and oddly enough, if you smell a stagnant smell, that's actually a nasty entity. They'll have a stagnant odor. Or you may feel the entity. You may feel like the hairs in the back of your neck rising. Or you may hear the entity. You won't see anything, but you hear a noise. So in fact, hypothetically, even sense of taste. Which reminds me, there was an interesting study some years ago in the 1970s, although, of course, these psychologists were skeptical, so they were explaining it a different way. They discovered that people who had been married for over 40 years or so, 30, 40 years, over half of them reported communication with their dead spouses. And they said they were normally afraid to tell the family because they were afraid the family would put them in a rest home or think they were suffering from dementia.
Wow.
But it's actually quite, contact is more common than you would think.
Is that like the shuddering, like when you feel like, you get that shiver, the old saying, somebody just walked over my grave?
Yes. That could be, again, when I mentioned it could impact your sense of feeling, sensation. And we talked earlier before we started the broadcast that dogs react to ghosts and cats to demons. So if a dog unexpectedly begins to react, there could be something there that you're not picking up on. And oddly enough, though, as we mentioned earlier, the spayed female dog actually drives away ghosts. It used to be used in England for protection from ghosts. And speaking while I'm talking about protection, people are afraid of them. They're afraid of iron. Also, sharp objects. Also, by the way, ghosts seem to like to, this is from Aboriginal Australia, harass people when alone in the darkness. They will avoid harassing people in crowds, in groups. That's why the Aboriginal people never travel out at night by themselves. Always go in groups. And oddly enough, in that culture, which is actually a widespread notion, many cultures do believe, because I talked about don't be afraid of them, that even of loved ones, the ghost can become, shall we say, an angry spirit and hurt you. That's a widespread notion. I don't really tend to go that way, but that's a widespread notion. That's why most cultures seem to fear them. And also, by the way, I should mention, Darwin used to like to, and incidentally, science has changed so much, Darwin actually used to go to seances with George Eliot, the novelist. You can't imagine these leading biologists today doing that. And but at any rate, the Darwin used to like, because he was hostile to religion, he would point out that there are cultures that do not have gods. They have no belief in God. Really primitive cultures. Yet we've never found a culture that doesn't believe in ghosts. It's universal. In fact, there's some evidence they're the first gods. The mighty dead become gods over time. So, and I'm sorry to keep going on, but ideas pop up.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, the only thing that popped in my head was just about, that there's a rumor, like, you see those stories where they say don't whistle after midnight because it'll attract the hellhound. You have the smell and something. I was wondering, is there any? Have you noticed any basis to that whole thing where it's just at a certain point, it's like this activity will attract attention?
That's actually an old belief that if you whistle in the dark, it attracts the dead. That's an old belief. It's been changed there to the hellhound, which symbolizes probably the garm that guards hell, the hell dog, the hellhound. But it's an old idea. And I should also mention all these ideas, the dead cannot cross water. That's a common notion. I'm in Portsmouth, Ohio, where Shawnee State University is. And the allegation would be there'd be an especially large number of hauntings here because they can't get across the river. If a ghost were to go across the water, it would disappear. So you often see these, again, clustering, although all paranormal, this is why skeptics find it suspicious. All paranormal activities, from Bigfoot, the dead, UFOs, Virgin Mary sightings, tend to occur around water. And it's really curious. Is somehow the water making it possible? Or is it, again, they would say, the skeptics would just say, well, this just shows that since it's all happening in the same location, it's just being imagined. It's not really real.
Was it like a conduit? Same way like Catholic Church, the holy water. You're sprinkling holy water, and so would water be viewed in that sense? This is a conduit, and if a ghost goes into it, well, obviously, what attracts? Conduit pulls energy, so if the ghost would hit water, obviously, that would make sense. Vanish. So they won't want to come in contact with water.
I apologized earlier before we started. I have a cold.
Oh, no, you're
to your audience. Actually, that's interesting you bring this up because water is typically viewed as a portal to the other side. In fact, you'll see in many notions, it becomes a mirror in some legends. And what a mirror is well, let's say in Celtic areas of Europe, a wishing well. When you're throwing a coin in the wishing well, you're throwing it to the entities on the other side. That's what you're doing. That's why in Scotland, for example, in the 17th century, they would arrest you and persecute you for doing that. They knew that was a pagan belief. But a crystal ball, which is also used for the paranormal, what that is a temporary body of water. Nostradamus used to stare into a cauldron of water to try to read the future.
Hmm.
And a crystal ball is just a permanent cauldron of water. But any shiny surface can be used to communicate with the other side. In fact, Dr. Raymond Moody, who's best known for Life After Life, he was a physician collecting near-death experiences, became a really big seller in the 1970s, frankly still is. He was in a southern state, I forget, it's either Georgia or Alabama, and he established what's called a theater of the mind, and it uses this principle. He claims you can use the theater of the mind to communicate with loved ones. People are told to bring possessions that belong to the loved one. The experience takes place at twilight or early night. You sit in a chair with a candle behind you. You have a big mirror about 3 feet tall. And he tilts the mirror so you can't see yourself. You're looking into shiny darkness. And according to Moody and people who've used this, they will start to encounter loved ones who are dead or talk to them. Moody himself claimed he experienced his own grandmother through this device. Even more, if your audience wants to try this themselves, this actually works, and we don't know what it is instrumental communication. And there are several ways to do it. They first noticed with the first development of the radio, late 19th, early 20th century, and recording devices, they were picking up stray voices. In fact, Marconi, who invents the radio, thought he actually, in this case, signals. He thought he was picking up Mars because he was getting what appeared to be rational signals coming through. And he had the only radio on the planet. So who's broadcasting? Now, again, today we dismiss this as quasars or something. He's picking up pulsars. But if you have, you can take a radio. In fact, you can use two of them. It's called, and Dr. Cardoso, who was a Portuguese scholar and actually diplomat, upper class, highly educated. She wrote probably the best book on this because she did it herself. And you turn the radio to white noise, not a channel. And then you have a recording device in the room. It's important to have the recording device. I prefer old-fashioned vacuum tube radios, or the old radios, because you can use modern ones as well, but I prefer the old ones. Also, I prefer the old-fashioned tape recorders, not digital. And the reason for that is when you're using digital equipment too, you can be accused of forgery really easily. So you turn it on to white noise, and then you have the recorder running. And at times when you play back the recording, you'll hear voices. And if you become really good at this, Cardoso recommends doing it the same time every week. Eventually you can carry on two-way communication. And they will answer. These voices will answer. Now, I don't know what that is. That could be some kind of, who knows? Could it be stray radio communication you're just picking up? That's what most people would think, except you can get actually logical responses to your questions. And incidentally, some years ago, did you ever see the film with Michael Keaton called White Noise?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I got the DVD, and they had, not only was the film depicting what really occurs in this phenomenon, the DVD extras actually had various people telling you how to do it. And of course, in the movie, he also used what's called closed loop video. You turn on, originally he uses a computer, but originally it's a television. And you have a recorder like a VCR old-fashioned camera, I should say, recorder camera, and you create a closed loop where the television is set to a non-station, snow.
Yep.
Then the camera is filming the snow and then putting the feed back into the television. Later, now you can only do this for about 15 minutes at a time because you have to go through each frame. You'll see images, people, faces, sometimes landscapes. Now, again, what is this? Is it stray electromagnetic radiation from broadcast television? We don't know, but it's really curious. And in the film with Michael Keaton, he's trying to talk to his deceased wife. He uses both techniques. And if you do what he does in the film, you can try this at home, so to speak. Some years ago in Luxembourg, there were these, they were filming for a program. I'm sorry, where did he disappear to? I was just curious when he disappears.
I think he's just grabbing something. It's just when he.
Okay. I was wondering if there's a glitch or something.
No, while we're at the stopping point here, I wanted to ask you. So, one theory I've heard is the parallel universe. Like this is a gateway. That what we're getting, the bleed through, is the same thing. Like there's an Austin on the other side. Almost like a mirror thing. At some point, somebody's trying to contact this other side at the same time you're doing it. And that's what we're getting almost this communication between the two because this is an area that's piercing that veil that allows.
It's very possible that the dead may be among us all the time. We just don't perceive them. And there could be communication going on. Or in the 19th century, when they first discovered Riemann, the geometry and mathematician person in Germany, first proposed there were extra dimensions like fourth dimension. It's been suggested that that's where the dead are. They're actually, because the fourth dimension would be invisible to us, but adjacent to us. And if they're in the fourth dimension, they could actually see us and hear us. Because when you're in the higher dimension, you can actually witness what's going on in the lower dimension. So there's all kinds of possibilities, which reminds me too, because when people play with, for example, you get teenagers. I remember doing as a young fellow Ouija boards. And I was going to say, what people don't realize, first of all, if you do establish communication with something, the ancient legends are, now that I know this stuff, is that the spirits will typically lie to you. They'll just tell you what you want to hear. So they may pretend to be somebody famous. You get two teenage girls and they think they're talking to Elvis. But they constantly lie. Now, that's why in the better made Ouija boards, they're probably now, they don't know what they're doing anymore and anything. So I haven't looked at one for years, but they're probably forgotten this. The original planchette, and by the way, the modern Ouija boards from 19th century France, but the Romans had a version of it, and so did the Greeks in antiquity. So it's not, even though it's called a modern device, it's really not. The original planchette that the French Ouija board had, and of course Ouija just means yes, yes in French and in German, had a triangle on the planchette. And there's a reason for that. We don't know why, but in old legends, spirits must speak the truth when inside of a triangle. That's why people practicing ceremonial magic would try to get the entity into a triangle. They have to speak the truth. Now, again, excuse me, often people will ask the dead, and keep in mind, I say they lie to us all the time, about the future. Well, this is, again, a popular, well, I should say a myth. According to the Greeks, when we're alive, we're changing constantly. So I'm not the same as I was yesterday, and I'll be different tomorrow. But the dead are frozen in time. So, for example, someone who died in 1960 on January 1st, if you contact him, he still thinks it's January 1st, 1960. And all the information in his mind, if you can call it that, if he's an entity, is from 1960. He won't know any of not the future he won't know. He won't know even what happened in 1961. That's why if you look at ancient literature, for example, in Virgil's Aeneid, when the hero contacts, he wants to know the future, and he goes to the underworld to talk to the dead, he wakens a prophet, someone who in life could see the future. An ordinary person would not know the future. That's even in the Bible when the witch of Endor is summoned by Saul. He summons someone who, a seeress, to learn what's going to happen. Now, of course, that's depicted in the Bible as a negative thing. The Bible's really down on all this paranormal activity and talking to the dead and so forth. But again, if you're going to learn the future, you must communicate with a prophet. So they're kind of frozen in time. Remember there was a film some years ago about, they're actually based on a real case. There was a man who had brain surgery in the 1960s, and the surgery was a disaster. And when he was brought back to consciousness, he could form no new memories for the rest of his life. He would wake up in the morning. I think he had the surgery at age 17 or 16. He would wake up in the morning, form some new memories of that day, of what he was doing that day. But when he went to bed at night, they all disappeared. When he woke up again, he was 16 years old in his mind. And that's essentially how the dead are. They're frozen in time.
It wasn't Brainstorm, was it?
I don't know. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, I know they kind of did a remake on that with 50 First Dates.
Yeah.
Adam Sandler, Drew Barrymore, where her memory was always every night wiped, came back, and they would tape something to kind of remind them, of what happened. But I was going to get you before we move on too much further. I was wanted to, like the ghost shows, you watch them where they're going around doing an investigation in a European castle, and they're always asking these questions in English. And that was one of the questions I've always had. If you're contacting somebody in the 1700s in this Bavarian area, they're not going to know how to speak English.
Yes, again, this is why it's kind of a fraud sometimes what we're doing. I should mention, remember I mentioned earlier haunted technology where you could use basically computers and televisions and radios. Mm-hmm. There have been examples of haunted computers. In fact, in the 1980s, the BBC, I think it was, did a documentary on it. I haven't looked at it in years. I forgot all the details. But this man was living, I think it was on the Welsh border, and he would unplug his computer, and then in the morning wake up and he'd see these communications in 16th century dialect, English dialect. And there were, over the couple of years, about 200 of these messages. And it's unclear what was going on. Was someone playing a trick on him? We don't know. And of course, that's how most skeptics would dismiss it, as a trick. But it seemed to be that it wasn't a trick, and there was somehow a communication coming through. And I should mention that often the communications, imagine they often appear almost like juvenile pranks. Poltergeist, that means playful spirit. That's the most common form of haunting, where things are tossed around your house and things are moved and you're harassed. Yep. It seems as if almost someone's just playing with us. It's not a serious activity. Now, again, in the movie Poltergeist, it's coming out of the TV and sucking people into a hellish region. It's possible these are some sort of elemental being that exists that we can't see them, and they're not really ghosts or entities. They're just, or I should say spirits. They're just simply messing with us. Imagine if what teenage boys would do if you send them in some kind of alien environment, they'd have at someone else's expense play pranks.
Oh, yeah.
Just to get a laugh. So a lot of this may just be, well, again, it's beyond we can't understand what really is going on. Oh, and by the way, earlier I mentioned, because again, we talked about pop culture and how it borrows from these real stories. And there was you all familiar with the Exorcist story? The novel by Blatty and then the movie Exorcist. Mm-hmm. What most people don't realize, that's based on a real story, but it's been distorted. The original story is I think he was 14-year-old boy. He was a young teenage boy, not a girl. And he was really close to his aunt, and she left him, she was dying. she left him a Ouija board to contact her from beyond. And he did. But then he became possessed.
Roland Doe.
William Blatty saw that story in the Washington Post in the 1940s and then wrote the novel, changing it to a girl and altering all the details. But often these stories are based on real things, and which reminds me too, the 1970s Philip experiment in Canada. Now this gives all kinds of firepower to skeptics, but again, if you understand how this stuff works, it doesn't necessarily disprove the idea. A group of researchers at a university, they first invented an imaginary character called Philip, who committed suicide in the 17th century after his gypsy lover had been burned as a witch. Now, first of all, that story doesn't ring true because England, although they burned wives who murdered their husbands, never burned witches. They hanged them. So they intentionally created a false entity with a false backstory, and then used seances to try to communicate with him. And often by this takes a long time. After a year of effort, Philip came through, talked to them. Now, the thing is, this was a fake story. So what was talking to them? So if you're a skeptic, you say, aha, this just shows it's a subconscious mind producing these communications. They're not real. But as I said earlier, entities will lie. You can't believe it. They'll pretend to be someone else. So if, again, I normally say when I'm talking to this to college students, we actually had, although it's been non-functional the last few years, and simply has the website, theotherworldsociety.org. It has all kinds of information on how to, it's on the web still, although the local club hasn't been meeting for a while. And we would hold seances here. And I would tell the students, I don't know if this is true or not, but at least I'll teach you how to do it. Now, one occasion, we had this is again how college students can be funny at times. And we're in the dark, and we got the candle. See, candles burn blue. Oh, you've got the website coming up?
Yeah, sometimes it just does it. It's weird. It's like, it does that freak out thing. See,
there it is. That's the website. Otherworldsociety.org. There's information for talking to the dead there. And that's a famous spirit photograph. Discrediting what I just said because it's just like a translucent entity. It could be an aging entity walking down the stairs. Anyway, we had this seance on the campus. It was nighttime. You have a candle because if it burns blue, that means a spirit is present. And we got all the effects. We got the blue candle going, and everybody's having this seance, and it was actually rather interesting. And people were getting these images, and they said it was a 20-year-old who had committed suicide at Ohio State University, of all places. We're Shawnee State University, and gave all these details. So we're finished. Everybody's walking in their car, and about 4 of us are in the elevator. And this young girl, I don't know why she didn't react earlier. She starts telling everybody, my sister went to Ohio State and died at the age of 20 in her dorm room. It was ruled as a natural death, but it was 20 years old. And all the details, even the first name was the same. I forget what it was. But she just didn't. I would think most people would react to this. This was somehow my sister was present.
Yeah.
This girl just kind of brushed it off like, whoa, that was kind of weird. Then she went and had a beer.
No, that seems weird. That it's just you start going, yeah, that sounds exactly like the story that happened in my family. You're like, yeah, just no big deal. I'm just going to continue on. It's like, yeah, why wouldn't that alert like instantly? Like, oh my God, that sounds like what's going on.
Echo.
But trying to think of any other stray notions. I think we may have covered most of the useful material so far. Even John. Oh, let me tell you one thing I should mention. I forgot to mention. This is again how skeptical I put a little. Students would call this a cheat sheet in front of me. The McDougall, who was this is again how the world has changed. He was a 19th century MD, and he himself was interested in studying the concept of the soul and the afterlife. And he Now, this would be illegal today and viewed as unethical. He got the people to agree to it. He carefully weighed dying people and then subtracted, after they died, the urine, the perspiration, the saliva. He was really careful. He had a really sensitive scale. And he discovered that I think it was approximately 6 grams. The dead person was roughly 6 grams lighter than the living person. Now, again, you'll see websites today poking fun of McDougal, say, what a big joke, he was weighing the soul. But it reminds me that in many cultures, there's an element of the physical to the dead. That's why many cultures, if you want to see if your house is haunted, they'll leave flour on the floor. Mm-hmm. You'll see footsteps the next morning if some entity is there. So again, all kinds of possibility. And I would say in general, again to your audience, that don't fear these things. It's evidence of afterlife, at least at some level.
And do you believe that's possible?
That with the footprint of the afterlife.
Well, to weigh the soul.
Well, again, see, the trouble is the notion that the soul is purely immaterial. That's not an ancient idea. That's actually more, well, it's ancient in the sense it's from Plato. Plato, the philosopher, was the one who made this really clear distinction between the kind of mind, spirit, and the physical body. But in most cultures, that's not the case. I mentioned earlier the Aboriginal people of Australia. They think your soul is roughly the size of a grain of like a seed, a small seed, and it's a physical thing. And it even after you die, it's still there. And who knows? I mean, the idea that the dead are completely detached from the physical world is unclear. Although I should mention, this to take us perhaps too far afield, perhaps, but I've always been intrigued by what Eastern thought refers to as non-dualist thought. And that's the idea that everything is just a dream. We're either dreaming it ourselves or we're in a dream of a god of some sort. That we think there's a solid table here. It's not really here. Because remember, in your dreams, everything's solid. If you get knocked down by a slamming door in your dream, you'll feel it. Yet it's really not there. And I should also mention while I'm talking about dreams is, again, this gives fuel to the skeptics only because they don't understand perhaps what's going on. Most paranormal contact will occur between sleep and waking state. And that's because in traditional lore, thresholds, when you're not either or, are important times for the paranormal. So now a modern psychologist, if you tell him, oh, I saw my beloved grandmother as I was waking up, he'll simply try to say, you were still dreaming. You didn't realize you were still asleep. That's what they'll say. And they'll all say it. They just cannot accept the possibility that it's real. That's called pathological disbelief. And but traditional cultures would say, you're in between states. That's why you've seen her then. And it's in that threshold time that it's most paranormal activity will occur between falling asleep and also waking up is when most of these activities, you're most sensitive to the paranormal. It's a very...
So question. Do you believe that if you open a Ouija board in your house, you could bring something you can't clear out?
Yeah, in fact, I tell all the students when I talk about these things, it's an old tradition that the knowledge is not dangerous, it's the practice. And I always tell them, don't do this stuff at home. And by the way, when we did it on campus, I was even taking the proper, just to play safe. I'm not certain this is all real. And I think I mentioned maybe in the email, I can't remember if I told you, but if you encounter an entity such as a ghost, all you have to do is throw a handful of grave earth at its head and it will obey you, no matter how malignant. So we had some cemetery earth in the room with us. And also we had the metal for the people that were outside the circle. And if you're going to do it, you have to do it properly. It's like don't play with electricity unless you know you're an electrician, or don't play with atomic power unless you know what you're doing. There's too many people that dabble with the paranormal, and they don't know what they're doing. And there are ways to protect yourself and be safe. And also,
we came back. We came back real quick about the iron. I wanted to touch on that real quick. Where's the basis of that they fear iron?
And sharp objects.
Well, here's the problem when I give you the answer, what we think is the answer, is normally what we do today, we try to rationalize what's going on. Like we know how they think, we know how they think. It appears as if, now the first iron that humans wielded were iron nickel meteorites. Although iron's abundant on Earth, it oxidizes so quickly. You don't see it around. And so they recovered the sky things. It made things from them. And because of that, made it appear as if iron were somehow uncanny, and also new technology, if you will, new substance. Normally, the old ones fear the new. That's why Sir James Frazer says iron is obnoxious to gods. And it is. I mean, the Bible makes it really clear that no iron was used in the construction of the Temple of Solomon. It said there was silence. And that appears in, we mentioned earlier, I think, when we talk about secret societies, as appears in Freemasonic legends. When you're initiated, you can't bring iron into the lodge. So it's probably something to do with the fact that it's unusual. They were used to using wood, stone, and bone. And iron is different. So that would be the idea. But it's a rationalization. See, the trouble is traditional peoples, ancient peoples, ideas don't leave fossils. So we have to speculate on what they were thinking. But it's a universal concept. They fear iron. And it's
because we've had a guest on before, where we talk about, fairies, pukas, changelings, and it's the same. It's almost a consistent thing. Iron is something that is a great ward to ward off these things, and that's kind of where I want to get with you. Is just where do you think this came from? And that description that makes complete sense of why that would become part of the nomenclature of this thing. Where here's an unusual object that nobody had ever seen before. I'm weary of it. Exactly.
So, like you said, there's the theory is that the ghosts are in the fourth dimension. Is not where is that could be, because my dad passed away in 2010, and a week or two after we had so many occurrences because we were fighting in amongst the family. It was just a problem. He came to us through phone calls, locking doors, and then obviously he just disappears. Where do they go, and why do they come back? Because when we had Tanya and Joey on, she described my father to a T, and I was like, why is he here? I didn't know he was there, but why do they come back, and where are they? If I don't know. It's hard to ask the question, but
no, actually, there's almost several questions in there. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
First of all, I should mention about the dimensions. Let's start with that. Now, remember, it wasn't until the 19th century they even thought in these terms.
Yeah.
And then they started suggesting maybe that's where God is, and also the dead. There's a wonderful book by Abbott called Flatland. He was an Englishman in the late 19th century, and he explains how it works. And the trouble with, you talk about dimensions, you have to reason by analogy. We first, for example, Abbott imagines a two-dimensional universe that would exist, let's say, on a tabletop, which, oddly enough, here again, how science camouflages things. They always say that nothing can accelerate faster than light in Einstein's physics. The reason they say that is if it does hit light speed, beyond it, it'll be two-dimensional only. They don't mention that part because they don't want to make the science classes interesting to the college students.
That's right.
And keep them boring. I always find it really intriguing. It's possible there's literally two-dimensional worlds out there that we're not familiar with. Now, you first imagine, remember, a two-dimensional, he could go around, up and down, this way. Well, you can't see me, I guess, but let's say if I raise the table up, he'd go this way, but he can't go this way.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you then imagine what he cannot do, and then imagine what a three-dimensional creature, for example, if I'm observing a two-dimensional universe, I could see him when he can't see me. I could be above him. I could watch him. He can't see me. A fourth dimensional entity could do that to us. We could be in a closed room. He could still see me. I could reach in and without breaking his surface, rip out an inner organ. A fourth dimensional creature could do that to you. He could reach in, tear out your heart, and your skin would be unbroken. If the fourth, if I reach into a two-dimensional universe, he would not see me as I really am. This is interesting because in most legends we can't perceive the gods or God. They usually say it's too majestic, but it could be too horrifying. He would first see what looked like four ovals penetrating, and then they would disappear, and he'd see one oval, my wrist. And then as I get in deeper, it would be the biceps. So it would be larger. And that's what would happen if a fourth dimensional entity reached in and grabbed you. People in the room would suddenly see, it appears as if out of nowhere, objects appear. And they may be detached, just like my 4 fingers here, 5 fingers were detached, but they're actually attached. But when they entered the two-dimensional, he wouldn't be able to see that. They would grab you and then pull you out. Now, when he had you out, that'd be total disorientation. If you were in the fourth dimension, it would be, you'd think you were insane. You couldn't possibly orient yourself. That's why if you're ever in the fourth dimension, don't move, because space will be different. Everything else will be different. You could easily get trapped there. And then this entity, just like I could reach in, grab a two-dimensional being, turn him upside down and put him back in. A fourth dimensional being could do that to you. And if he did it, when you came back, suddenly your right hand is your left and your left is your right. And everything's reversed.
It's going to make it a little fun to go to sleep tonight.
Yes.
you're just
So again, if these ghosts exist or these entities can exist in the fourth dimension, they could observe us at any time. They could speak to us at any time, just like I could do to a two-dimensional being. And they could enter into our level of existence, but we wouldn't really see them as they are, if they're actually fourth dimensional entities. And modern physics is not dismissing the possibility of higher dimensions. Not this fourth dimension of time like Darwin. We're not talking about this. We're talking fourth dimension in space, fifth dimension in space, 6, 7, even 10. And it's possible that the universe and the world is far more complex than we can imagine. And there may be literally, right now as we speak, there may be monstrous entities adjacent to you, literally inches away, but in another dimension. So that's why you don't see them. And at times they may come in and mess with you. So that'll give you some nightmares tonight.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's.
Before you go on that, so does that count? Like we have no idea how the brain works. Do you feel like you said, they pull you out of your dimension? That's when you kind of just stare blankly off. You daydream. You just feel like you're out of a body experience. That they're pulling you out. That kind of explains a little bit. Yes, and by the way, it reminds me, because I'm always making these pop culture references. There's actually really interesting, the original Twilight Zone with Rod Serling. He has an episode in which a little girl disappears into the fourth dimension. And the father and his friend and the family dog are able to reach in and bring her out. But they discuss what it would be like. The father just doesn't know what's going on with his daughter. They just happen to know this physicist who understands these ideas. And he's telling them, don't move. And, if you literally move just a foot, it may take you some great distance over there. It's possible, since at least, several 100,000 Americans disappear each year. Most of them, we know they're just people that losing their debts or taking a new identity. There's about 30,000 a year that we don't know what happens to them. Yeah. And it's possible they're just somehow fall into
a hole somewhere and never come back. It's funny, nothing is ever perfect in nature, yet we assume space and time are somehow flawless. There's no flaw in the flow of time or in the fabric of space, but it's possible there are holes all over the place. And you could just be walking across. There have been cases of this. People alleging it was a famous case in the 19th century farm. Of course, they dismiss it as just Hicks. A man on a farm walking across a field, and suddenly he disappeared.
Oh yeah, of course.
The family, I forget the name of the man, but the family started digging holes where he was and never found him again. And for a while, if I remember correctly, they could hear a voice, but he wasn't there. So, and this could also explain, like when they have these lost aircraft, they claim the Bermuda Triangle, but it happens globally. Remember some years ago, the Malaysian airplane never found it?
That never found it. Where does a big jet go like that? I mean,
Interesting.
I know, it just seems hard to believe, doesn't it? It just can be.
You just gave me You just gave me a business idea earlier. Is your house haunted? Yes, it is. There may be treasure laying around. Let me come search your property with a metal detector.
Exactly.
You just gave me an idea. Is your house haunted? Do you see people?
In old traditions, I should also mention, because Americans will leave houses vacant for even years for the real estate market. In England, it was the old idea: if you left a house vacant more than 2 weeks, it could take on a ghost.
The ghost
and I
found the
forgot
home.
to tell you, I forgot to mention this. This is from Haiti, voodoo. When somebody dies in a house, a sorcerer can nail 2 nails into the wood in the house, and that'll trap a soul there. He'll become a ghost. And allegedly, they do that to drive down the price of the house. Because if a house is haunted, you get a good buy.
That's an awesome scam. Somebody just goes in there, you're over there nailing, like, oh crap! Well, we just lost a lot of money.
Yes.
You know what's funny though, Chris I'm bouncing off of Chris. When I first moved into my house, I a lot of sleepless nights trying to move, and actually the funny thing is we had an episode about ghosts, and I thought I was freaking out and stuff. And like you said, the neutered female or spayed female can sense ghosts. The blind deaf dog, she always barks for no reason. I'm like, just whatever. And now that you said that the ghosts, like, if you look for treasure, there's one square, a tile in my living room that it's hollow. And I always tell my girlfriend's mom, I said,
pull it up.
When we move these floors, I'm going straight to there. Because why is this one only hollow?
Yeah,
and
I would check it out.
Said that there's ghosts staying over their wealth. There's something there. Not what they
Pull it
before.
up.
I mentioned earlier when we started this, and I said that my father, who was the greatest Mirabello who ever lived, Paul Mirabello, and his father, because his father grew up during the Depression, actually hid money. There was an upstairs, hid money in the stairwell. Huh. There was a special, you lift up this step, and he had money there, so that because he had lived through the Depression, banks had collapsed, and he pulled my father aside as a young boy and said, I'm telling you only, this is where the money is, and don't touch it except in emergencies. And then, of course, how families are. After my aunt lived there until my grandmother lived there, and then my aunt lived there till her death. And we were curious because my dad had told me, and we checked. Was there money still there? And I'm guessing one of the cousins must have stolen it. But I mean, it's just kind of like family stuff. But Hindus, by the way, would traditionally hide gold in a secret place, and the family would be told generation after generation, don't access it unless there's an emergency. They would simply tell them where it was. And often Hindus are more patient. It could go on for hundreds of years. But hiding, now money's going to be worthless, so you have to hide gold, or silver, because money, who knows? There's 600 currencies in recent world history, and about all but 120 have collapsed at one time. So
precious gems, gold and silver are going to be the eternals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Although not to get too far afield, but you have to be aware of buying gold now because there's a scam called salting gold. They hollow it out and put tungsten inside.
I met a guy at a gold place who bought some gold coins. He thought they were gold bullions, but no, they were hollowed out bullions. And his guy paid top dollar for them, and worth nothing. They're worthless.
That's amazing. People do that, but you have to be really careful. So silver is probably safer because it's not going through all the trouble. It's a cheaper metal. So buy silver and store it up. So to be safe, always plan for disaster. And in general, mentioned the Viking about your hauntings and so forth. But in most cases, in the legends, almost no ghosts are really dangerous.
Yeah.
The one exception would be, for example, the Flying Dutchman. That's the alleged, the ship that has the damned crew. Their souls are damned to hell, and they wander endlessly in the high seas. And the story is, if you see the Flying Dutchman, and it has been viewed before, you die a horrible death within a brief period of time. It was sighted by a British warship in the 19th century by one of the seamen, and he fell off the mast shortly afterward and died. And oddly enough, a member of the royal family was on the ship at the time. I forget which one it was. So it's a well-documented case. And also, there's a tradition, the captain of the Flying Dutchman, every 100 years, comes ashore to look for a woman. Takes her onto the ship of the damned. Wow. Want to take a ride, honey? So again, always beware of strangers, especially if they smell like seaweed.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. Awesome. Well, everybody, we're going to show you right here again. You need to go to Amazon. You need to pick up A Traveler's Guide to the Afterlife. Traditions and beliefs on death, dying, and what lies beyond.
Well, thank you, sir.
Support Dr. Mark Mirabello, in his efforts. Once again, having you on, fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, you brought up a couple things like I said I wasn't even aware of before, and I absolutely love that. And this one, I want to get this book just to check this out, because this has always been something that's been a fascination of mine as well. So, yeah.
Oddly enough, the subjects we've talked about today are in two of the two chapters at the end. The earlier part, I've been on some other podcasts discussing what it's like when you're dead, the afterlife, the existence, how to go there, the travel there. And then I had 2 chapters on talking to the dead and what ghosts are. So I tried to cover every aspect. I'm an old-fashioned generalist. I always try to cover everything, not just a narrow field. So thank you for the recommendation.
Oh, yeah. I appreciate you coming back on again, because this is just, the second interview, and once again, you keep dropping information that, it's like my homework list grows with these interviews, sir. So,
well, thank you very much.
Yeah, we need to let you go. Rest up and get ready for class tomorrow. So,
I have to give them it's midterm time, so I get to torture students, separate the sheep from the goats.
Hey, I could pick. You look like you're smiling a little too much on that one. So, Doctor, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. We will be in touch. Like I said, if we come up with another topic here, like I said, we definitely have you in there about bringing you on for the expert side of it. So,
well, thank you very much. Nice talking to you, gentlemen.
Take care of that cough, and we will talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you very much. Good night now.
Have a good night. Okay. Once again, everybody go check out on Amazon. Go look at that book. This episode has been brought to you by Brot's Beard Care. Go to beardcare.com. Use promo code 3beards with a capital B, and you're going to save 20% off. And there's always free shipping. Amazing beard oil, beard soap. I can't recommend this stuff enough. I mean, we use it all the time.
Amazing. I slacked off a lot, and my beard started getting really scruffy and irritated because obviously we're coming into the short winter of Florida. I did that beard soap in a matter of 2 days, man. It's just so soft. You see the beard's actually not scraggly anymore. I love it, man. Kelly's amazing. He's
got the key lime blend on it currently right now, so that's got a little bit of the shine. But go to other sponsor, Nanny Cakes, Nancy Burke. Go to Nanny Cakes 407 on Facebook, or give her a call at 407-923-2898. Check us out on social media. Go to 3beardspodcast.com. Chris is showing our signature blend there,
Nice.
made by Kelly with all of his magical gnomes that help him out with that and sing him songs as he creates it, telling him what he should have done that day and what lesson he needed to learn. So go pick that out, support for him. Like, subscribe on all areas of the Twitter, YouTube, Instagram versus, subscribe. Go to patreon.com/3beards podcast and support us. We would appreciate it. We're waiting for that first person that finds that in their heart to do. Come on. So everybody, thank you again for watching. Appreciate it. We will see everybody on this next Wednesday. Everybody have a great week, and we will talk to you later. Good night.